One of the things that makes human beings unique is the fact that we're self-conscious. Now, you'll see ethologists, or people who study animal behavior, do relatively elementary tests of self-consciousness on animals. So one of the most famous demonstrations of such self-consciousness is the mirror test. And so in the mirror test, what you essentially do is you take an animal, maybe a chimp, or maybe a 3-year-old child, and you put a lipstick mark on their forehead or on their nose, and then you show them a reflection of themselves in the mirror. And if they wipe off or gesture towards the lipstick mark, then you can make the presumption that they understand that it's them that's being reflected in the mirror. Or at least they understand that well enough so that they can use the mirror as a guide to action with their hand, or whatever it is that they happen to be pointing with, and the reflection. Now, dolphins seem to be able to manage that. There's some members of the corvid family. So those are basically crows and ravens. Those things are really smart, and they seem to possess rudimentary self-consciousness. I said dolphins, cetaceans in general, so whales, although I don't know if all whales are self-conscious, because it's, for example, difficult to get a mirror big enough to show a blue whale. Human beings, and that's about it. Now, I don't think that's a very good definition of self-consciousness, really, because the mere fact that you can recognize yourself, and it's also not fair to some animals like dogs, right? Because a dog would need a smell mirror, really, because, and most animals are very, very smell predicated. Most of the brain is structured with a olfactory system as its core, unlike us, really, because our brains are structured with the visual system at the core, and that makes us rather peculiar. But so it's a little unfair to animals like dogs or any rats that rely primarily on olfaction to orient themselves in the world. But the thing is, I don't think that's really a very good definition of self-consciousness. It's very rudimentary. You might say, well, that's the first sort of step to being self-conscious. Because if you're fully self-conscious, I think you need two more things. You need the capacity to imitate, which is a much more important capacity than people generally realize. In fact, I would say it's of equivalent importance. It's of equivalent importance to language. In fact, I'm not even sure that you could use language if you can't imitate. First of all, obviously, all the words you use are also the words that other people use. Otherwise, you're not going to be very comprehensible. So even the mere fact that you do speak means that you're relying on imitation to get your point across. So you need imitation, and the reason you need imitation is because once you can imitate, you can use your body as a representational structure to represent the world and other people. You can even use your body as a representational structure to represent yourself, which you might do, for example, if you're telling a joke at a dinner party, and then you act out a self-parody and everyone laughs. And then with regards to language, well, language obviously enables you to build sophisticated models of the world that are well articulated, to exchange those with other people, and to think. Okay, so in order to be self-conscious, you have to be able to recognize that you exist in this physical envelope, at least here and now. You need to be able to imitate, because that's partly how you come to understand yourself and other creatures like you, which is a very important part of being self-conscious, right? I mean, everything I learn about any of you is also going to help me understand the sort of creature that I am, whether that's for good or for evil. And then, with language, well, not only can we articulate our representations about each other in the world, but we can also store those articulated representations over very, 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 very long spans of time. And we do that partly in ritual, which is the acting out of a representation, and we do that partly with regards to stories, which are in some sense an articulated representation of an acting out, right? Because you can think of a story as a drama. So a drama is behavior representing behavior, and then a story is an articulated representation of a drama. Now, we have very old rituals and we have very, very old stories. And so, part of what we do in this course is we go back to as close to the beginning as we can possibly manage to start to understand how people have understood themselves and represented themselves across the span of human history. And we're doing that because we want to be able to put our current knowledge in some kind of historical context. And part of the reason for that is, well, one of the things that characterizes a human personality is that it's a historical phenomenon. You know, I'm sure you've heard in many classes that much of what makes up your personality is a cultural construct. Well, whether or not much of it is or not isn't really the issue. Certainly some of it is, and an important part, you're a cultural creature. And that means that you have emerged within a tradition that's been shaped in any number of ways by an extraordinarily lengthy historical past, historical and biological. And so what that means in part is that if you don't understand your history, and that's your history as it matters, not necessarily some collection of facts, then you don't understand yourself. So, you know, human beings in their self-conscious form, we don't really know how old we are. More or less biologically or genetically identical creatures to us existed at least 150,000 years ago. But we seem to have discovered fire and were able to master it maybe 2 million years ago, you know, and that required a fair bit of intelligence. And there are artifacts that indicate a fair high level of cultural capacity that are at least 50,000 years old. So we can't really say when we got fully self-conscious, and perhaps we might also say that we're not even fully self-conscious yet, because, you know, really, what the hell do you know about yourself? You know, you're really, 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 really complicated. And at best, you have a partial model of who you are. And that thing fails all the time, which, as you can tell, because you're always doing things that surprise you, and often not in a particularly positive way. So there's no end of mystery.